Jersey Joe joined me on today's episode of Locked On Devils as we're going to talk about the recent trade that transpired between the Devils and the Islanders prior to their matchup tonight, as it involved Tyce Thompson and also Arnaud Durandeau. Who got the better prospect? And also, speaking of prospects, let's discuss the future for the Devils involving some of their key young assets and where does the team go from here. There's a lot to break down in today's episode with Jersey Joe. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils writer for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews, joined alongside my colleague over at Pucks and Pitchforks, also a scout. It is Joseph Stanislaw, a.k.a. Jersey Joe. Joe, it's been a while since we've spoken. It's been over a month since you've appeared on my show, and I said, you know what? It's been a while. So why not reconnect after American Thanksgiving, after I was covering a couple of games at the Prudential Center for the Devils. So first and foremost, how you doing? How was your Thanksgiving? And ready to talk some Devils once more?
Yes, well, I am very thankful for the health of Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier finally back. And thank the holy New Jersey Devil that Alexander Holtz is hitting his stride.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alexander Holtz is interesting. I don't think he's really going to reach the expectations or the ceiling that we initially had on him because he was a former 7th overall pick. But the thing is like, it's not really his fault. It's because the Devils just became much more successful. So the expectations sort of shift for him because obviously during the offseason, during exit interviews, Tom Fitzgerald and company, which included Kevin Dineen, they had a serious sit-down discussion with them saying, like, look, you need to step up your game. Otherwise, you're going to be benched or worst case scenario for Holtz, he might be traded away. So he really did have to step up his game, and now he has a goal in back-to-back games. So let me get your thoughts on Alexander Holtz. What are your expectations for him, and where do you think he goes from here? Is he still being groomed for the trade market?
At this point, I don't think he's on the trade market at this point. I mean, look, you look at where he's at now. He's at a pace for 26 goals and 39 points, according to EliteProspects.com. So they do a little bit of a ratio of that, kind of like what I usually do if I didn't look at it. So the way I look at it is he's secretly, quietly beginning to pop offensively. Now, he does start to get a little bit more time. And I said this on the Uncle Puckers podcast a few episodes ago. And they asked me from a scouting point is, do you feel Alexander Holtz is mismanaged? A few episodes ago, yes. Right now, no. Because Lindy Ruff really has no room to really maneuver him around until Timo Meier comes back. But I always said third and second line, you never put Holtz on a fourth line. You do not do that with an elite level sniper. He's got to, make his stride somewhere and build a rhythm. Right now, we're seeing that rhythm. Even though the 2 games back, he did score, in the previous game. And then in the recent game that the Devils obliterated Buffalo, he scored a beautiful opening goal. And he's been known to do that since his World Junior days and his times with Djurgårdens in Sweden. So he's learning on the fly. And I said this before on Uncle Pucker's podcast. You can take my word for it. He is too good for the AHL, and he's not going back. Not at all.
Yeah, that was my thing. I was like, he can't stay in the AHL forever. And I'll add on to that saying, like, when he's representing Sweden on a national scale, he's actually also putting up some decent numbers for them as well. So it was just a matter of, like, how does he transfer his success from the AHL and also the Sweden national team to the NHL? That's been the biggest struggle. But the thing is, like I said, it's not entirely his fault just because the Devils have become more successful. And I think he's been hindered by the Devils' growth and just surgence of now going from a rebuilding team to trying to become a playoff caliber team. And I think Ryan Novozinski of NJ.com, I think he wrote an article about that, how Holtz's development has been hindered by the Devils' success, which is the case for a lot of the Devils prospects. But, you know, Nolan Foote is still recovering from injury. I think Tom Fitzgerald has revealed that he wants to give Foote a couple reps at the NHL a little bit more consistently. But the thing is like, when we look at like spots available, it's very thin for the Devils. So when we look at like the trade deadline, we might see some of these prospects on the move just because the Devils have a lot of assets to offer while they still are hot commodities. But the problem, and is it fair to say like these prospects should be dealt away? No. But at the same time, it's like, would they be given a fair chance to thrive in the Devils system for a team that has their eyes set on the playoffs?
Well, let me throw this in there. So you mentioned playoffs. So as Money Puck lies today, and today is the 27th of November, the Devils have 58% odds of winning a playoff spot, 3.2% of winning the Stanley Cup, 7% to make the Cup final. You know, last year I thought the Florida Panthers were almost dead in the water. However, they were in the same situation. They clawed back. They took a wild card or whatever, top three. I always say get the Sweet Eight spot.
They were a wild card team.
Right. So they got to the Sweet Eight in the East, and lo and behold, they were the zombie apocalypse team that just took the whole entire Eastern Conference by storm. And you can definitely scare the crap out of anyone if you pull off those odds. And if you're going to bet your dollar, do it with Trey Matthews with promo code Say It Now.
All right, so you tossed it over for me to do the FanDuel read. So right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. That's $150 if your team wins. If you're thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over and unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. And why don't you bet on some New Jersey Devils money lines while you're at it, so that way you can get some extra money into your pocket. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. Please remember to gamble responsibly.
All right, so back with the other odds, I do want to mention from Money Puck is that the Devils have a 17.8% chance of winning second in the division and 21.4% third in the division as of today. And wild card first spot, 6.9%, and then 7.6% for the wild card two spot. So things may seem grim early in the season now, like almost 25-33% of the way through. Like I always listen to the great Greg Schiano. You see a big forest of trees, you got to keep chopping one tree at a time, and eventually you're going to see the light at the tunnel. And the New Jersey Devils can see the light at the end of the tunnel. They just have to keep pounding away with Nico Hischier and Jack Hughes centering this team. And so you just got to keep on chopping.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the Metropolitan Division, right now the Rangers are running away with the first spot in the Metro. They currently have 31 points, and they're on a 3-game win streak at the time of this recording. But after that, it's still anyone's game. So the Hurricanes have 24 points. The Flyers have 23. Capitals, Islanders are tied for 22. And then the Penguins, who are just ahead of the Devils, they have 20 points. So a win streak for the Devils can do them wonders. And I've been talking about on my show the last few days, which is the schedule does fall into the favor of the Devils because the matchups are sort of on the softer side. So I highlighted the game against the Blue Jackets. Blue Jackets were last in the Metro. Obviously, the Devils didn't come away with the win. The Sabres, the Devils have already beaten the Sabres this year. Their next matchup when this episode goes live will be later tonight when they take on the Islanders, So that's going to be a little interesting. But my thing is, like, the Metro is still up for grabs. And yes, maybe the Devils won't get the first position, but like I said, if the Devils needed a win streak, now is the time to do so when the schedule is still somewhat soft. But the one thing I cannot reiterate enough is that no win is a guaranteed win for the Devils at this point. They still
Nor is a win in the NHL. Remember, there are 32 teams, and this is the best hockey league professionally in the world. So every team has a chance to win, unless you're the San Jose Sharks, mind you, who are like a 200-plus team. Then forget about it.
Right. The point I'm just trying to make is that the Devils need to earn back that sentiment of just being like a dominant team, because for right now, they're one of the bottom teams in Metro. They got to earn that back. It sucks, but that's just the hand that's been dealt to them for the time being.
And so then before we get into all that, you mentioned trade deadline is going to be, I think it's March 8th this year, according to Pierre LeBrun.
We'll check that out. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about a trade that the Devils actually made recently. So they dealt Tyce Thompson to the Islanders, speaking of which, and in exchange, they got Arnaud Durandeau. So what can you tell me about Durandeau? Because I've been looking at some of his numbers and comparing him to Thompson, at least at the AHL level, I would say Durandeau is the better player.
Yeah, he's 24 years old, 317 days, January 14th of 1999. So he's 10 years younger than me. So he is going to be younger than Nico, if I remember, just slightly younger than Nico, around that same age group. So he's actually from Quebec. So he's actually from Montreal. So he is definitely one of your more interesting pieces. He has a Fenwick percentage FFW of 47.8% with the Islanders in 22-23. He had a Corsi 4 of 50% right there. So his defensive zone starts were 50% and his offensive zone starts were 50%. But if people want to look at his Halifax years, he actually progressed from his first season. He was more so offensive than defensively because his plus minus was a negative 18. But the next year, 16-17, he progressed to a minus 6, scoring 41 points. Next year, he yielded 53 points with a plus 1. And why could that be? Nico Hischier, a two-way player, helped centering him out, getting better defensive results. So when you have players like a Hischier with him, a lot of players do better around him. So guys like Durandeau are able to put the puck in net and set up plays. And then he also played in the Memorial Cup in 2018-2019. So he had 3 points in 4 games played. So he's no stranger to being, high intense situations. So his final year in Halifax, he had 73 points in 68 games, 38 goals. And he had a plus minus of positive 29. So he's been on the growth since the AHL and the ECHL. So he's actually been in the AHL for the past 3 years consecutive after going back and forth with the Bridgeport Islanders and the Worcester Railers. So he shot up from 2021 with 8 points in 14 games played to scoring 37 points in 64 games in the AHL and 55 points in 68 games. So he's really historically an offensive player. It's just a matter of playing more so two-way.
Yeah, so, and you mentioned Nico Hischier. Well, he also played with Timo Meier in the queue with Halifax as well. So for what it's worth, he already has some association with both Meier and Hischier. And when looking at Durandeau and what he's did last year for Bridgeport, he appeared in 68 games. He had 24 goals, 31 assists for a grand total of 55 points. And when looking at the flip side of it, when we analyze Tyce Thompson, like I said, I think Durandeau is the better player, or at least the player that has a lot more upside, because it seems like Thompson wasn't really going to be given a fair chance to play for the Devils because he's had a cup of coffee with New Jersey at spurts the last few years. But last year for Thompson in the AHL, he appeared in 56 games. He had 7 goals, 19 assists for a grand total of 26 points, which I guess theoretically isn't bad if you're a bottom 6 player. But it's the same thing we talked about in terms of prospects for the Devils, which is if you're not really performing up to par, or if Fitzgerald doesn't see any role for you, it seems like the prospects will be dealt away. Now, obviously, Durandeau is a prospect himself, essentially. So, but I think Durandeau definitely has a lot more upside, and I think the numbers show it. So, a lot of people on social media were confused by the move, but honestly, if Durandeau translates his numbers from the AHL to the NHL, which he's had once again, similar to Thompson, he's had a cup of coffee with the NHL. So he appeared in 4 games last year for the Islanders, didn't really do much. But if he's able to just once again, just transfer what he did last year to the Devils, or at least spurts, I think that's actually a good move for New Jersey. Yeah,
some of those more subtle moves could translate into getting you through the thick and thin of I like to call it the Mount Everest push, because if you think of the NHL, you have 82 games. That's basically climbing a mountain. Right now, we're at the early part of the mountain. And how can other teams get through the season? Do they have to go over the mountain a lot smoother than some others, or are they going to go through more rockier moments? And this is one of those things where a guy like Durandeau can obviously propel a team from the bottom 6 and add that extra chemistry up front, especially when you have Nico and Timo around. Like you said, familiarity is a good source of chemistry. And I always like to believe is that when you already played all these other games at previous levels with other teammates, you kind of know what to think and where your teammate will be. So this gives that familiarity and that play style of chemistry down. And also, you got to think about some of the other players too in Utica. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, Devils, if they're waiting to get a trade for Chris Tanev or Nikita Zadorov, you got to think about guys like Daniel Misule maybe temporarily coming up. I do not see Brendan Smith being a defenseman again. I do not think he's ever going to play defense going forward unless Ruff decides so. But if Simon Nemec is deemed ready to be better overall defensively, I wouldn't be surprised to see him called up. And he's already played 12 games out of the quarter mark of the season that I was projecting. Before the season, maybe plays another 12 more games, see where he goes. But right now you have Xavier Perron, who's a center left winger with 6 goals, 13 points. Chris Cuolo, he's got 13 points in 12 games played, 4 goals, 9 assists. But Simon Nemec, 2 goals, 6 assists in 12 games played. I would not be surprised to see Nemec get called up a little bit later in the season if Tom Fitzgerald and Kate Madigan and Dan McKinnon all agreed that it would be the best for his growth in the near term at the NHL level.
I think for Simon Nemec, I talked about it in my bold takes episode before the start of the season. I said, if Nemec really wants to showcase his skill set, he's going to have to wait till next year, because you talked about Brendan Smith. Brendan Smith has 1 year left on his contract. So he has this season and then he'll be a free agent. So that's a matter of will Smith be in the long-term plans for Devils? If he continues to play well at the winger position and hold down his end of the bargain, then I think Tom Fitzgerald will consider bringing back Smith, because he is great in the dressing room. He's a great veteran player. But the one thing I said was he needs to showcase something on the ice. So I think Smith is better suited as a bottom 6 player, but we'll see what happens. And then Colin Miller Is he going to be in the future plans for the Devils? Because obviously you got to factor in what he's been able to do for Luke Hughes. Seems like Luke Hughes is responding really well with Colin Miller as his defensive partner. So my thing is like, for Shimon Nemeth, I just don't think that chance is going to come this season, because if he was brought up to the roster, let's just say the Devils send somebody down to the AHL. If he's brought up to the roster, he's going to be used as a seventh defenseman most likely, and that's not really a fair chance for him to showcase what he can do. So I think for Shimon Nemeth, you're going to have to wait until next year to really see him try to make an impact for the Devils, and that's okay.
Yeah, I always tell people it's better to not rush a prospect. Like, I didn't want to see Nemeth, go and just jump in, the diving board and be like going to the deep end and not be able to swim. I want him to go into the shallow end and learn how to swim his way through the prospect pool, so to speak. But now he's learning to float around and really doing his job. And he's starting to perform really well offensively. It's just the defensive part. Can he just, use his stick more actively and keep that frame of his, like that A-frame with his legs kind of spread, and just stay in front of the opposing player and just slow them down. And speaking of slowing down, I do want to talk about the way the Devils were neutral zone trapping the Buffalo Sabres. Now that is a blueprint for that new segment. So I noticed that they were doing the 1-3-1 blue line trap in the neutral zone.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I think that's the same exact play that teams use against the Devils, because they know that they can forecheck the Devils a little easier, because the Devils are a relatively soft team. That's been the narrative this season and also last season. Obviously, losing Timo Meier didn't help them in that case. But it's just like, I think that the 1-3-1 that you talk about, what the Devils were doing against the Sabres, that's exactly what opposing teams have been using against the Devils, because they know that they can basically force the Devils to cough up the puck. They can force them to ice the puck, whatever the case might be, because people know that if you're just somewhat aggressive against the Devils, you'll see a better outcome on your end.
And here's another thing. Like, before we got on, I mentioned the Devils need to add another gritty sandpaper playoff performer, via trade, that I would recommend. Martin Brodeur has ties to this guy, and I mentioned this guy in my recent article on Pucks and Pitchforks. And this is Martin Brodeur's guy he knows, Sammy Blais. I would go for this guy. This guy hits a ton. He is a good second, third line forward. He's someone that knows what winning a Stanley Cup is in St. Louis. He's been on some other playoff teams. I know he played across the Hudson, but you know what? He's someone that would fit this team perfectly. We missed that Miles Wood presence. When Timo Meier comes back, you get another couple of very strong forecheckers. And this team needs to forecheck the F hard in the opposing zone. And once you blitz the opponent down and batter them down like you did last year, forget about it. Devils increase their odds of winning.
What about Curtis Lazar, though? I know Curtis Lazar right now is injured because he got dinged up in the game against the Blue Jackets and he did not play against the Sabres. But theoretically, let's just say he's healthy and he's ready to go in the next game against the Islanders, because I still don't have any word as to what's going on with his injury. At the time's recording, it is Monday morning. I think Lindy Ruff said he will have a better assessment come this time regarding people like Eric Holla and Curtis Lazar, who got dinged up the last couple of games, and also Timo Meier, who still remains out. But right now, I don't have that word quite yet. But anyway, Curtis Lazar, I know like he's been playing with Jack Hughes a little bit more, but I think Curtis Lazar, honestly, has been adding that more sandpaper type feel. Now, I'm not against getting Sammy Blais. I'm not against that at all, because he has 1 year remaining on his deal, or he signed a 1 year extension with the Blues. So it wouldn't. I don't think it would cost much to get him. And in 19 game appearances, he has 1 goal, 4 assists for a grand total of 5 points. But that obviously we would be getting him for his for the other metrics, which is like his ability to hit someone or his ability to play aggressive or his ability to play hard. And we'll talk more about that momentarily. But I think Curtis Lazar sort of has been replacing Miles Wood. And obviously there's been some growing pains of replacing some of the players that are no longer on the roster, especially the long tenured players like Damon Severson and Miles Wood, and also Mackenzie Blackwood to an extent, because it seems like the Devils have been having some goaltending issues this year, and who would have thought? But I think Curtis Lazar sort of fits that role for New Jersey, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I mean, you do have to have a little extra depth, though, and I'm not against adding more physical players. I've always preached Sasquatching for years and years at this point, and I always want to see that playoff hockey hybrid. Last year in the first round, the Devils had just enough grit and skill to get around the Rangers. But when they played the Carolina, they didn't have enough physicality to take down a Svechnikov-less Hurricanes team. They
or
need
a Teravainen-less Hurricanes team, too. Svechnikov and Teravainen were both out.
Yeah, and I didn't bring him up right away, but what I'm saying is you need to add some extra physical bodies in case that one player goes down. And it's good right now, early in the season, that the Devils are getting these injuries out of the way and they're dealing with adversity very early, because it's better to deal with it then than later in the middle and late in the season, where it's like it kind of ruins your odds of getting into a playoff spot. And the Devils and Tom Fitzgerald, please listen to this podcast, because you better go look at a guy like Sammy Blais. He only cost you $1 million.
Well, Tom Fitzgerald has actually told me that he's familiar with my work because he sees it on social media at times, but I don't think he's ever listened to my show, let's be honest.
I'll be honest with this, though. I mean, I was just reading a little something about James Nichols talking about having Brandon Smith embraced and revived as a gritty forward. And he mentioned recently that he was talking about building a brotherhood recently after sticking up for Nico. And he said, Brandon Smith was quoted, "We're preaching brotherhood." And I think coming in last year, that was a big focus. We need to be there for each other. And that fight against Clifton, that was in parentheses, was a moment for that. Having Nico back is huge for our club. It gave us a big jump. Well, I was actually next to James Nichols when he was asking that question to some of the Devils players post game. So we had the chance to speak with Alexander Holtz, Tyler Toffoli, obviously Nico Hischier, also Jonas Siegenthaler, and as always, Lindy Ruff. So that was one of the questions that James was bringing up, alongside with like how much does getting Nico back into the lineup help this roster. So yeah, I mean, James is absolutely right, that was huge for the Devils. And I love that from Brandon Smith. Yes, it wasn't a standard NHL fight. Neither one of them got fighting majors. Both of them just got a 2-minute roughing because no punches were thrown. But still, Smith got a huge thunderous applause from the Devils fan base because he body slammed Clifton down to the ground. And Clifton knows that that's probably not going to be the last lick he's going to get the next time the Devils play the Sabres. Well, any team that's trying to take liberties in that, you know what worries the crap out of me is someone pulling a Jacob Trouba baseball swing on Trent Frederick. You see, the player of safety is too soft on these dirty players. And had the player safety fined not just $5,000 on the player, they should also slap maybe $25,000 on the parent team for this. Anytime your player does something stupid, we'll tax you and make you pay down to escrow. So for me, I think guys like Trouba should be held accountable with at least 5 to 15 game suspensions, or Connor Clifton to that extent. And you're going to break someone's season almost, having a guy like Nico out for almost 11 games.
No, he was out.
He was out 11 games. So I'm just saying, for just
exactly.
any other team out there, So if the NHL is listening, you need to take your Department of Player Safety very seriously. Doesn't matter if they're wearing the NYR Original 6 crap on their jersey. They need to be treated the same way as a non-Original 6 team. It has to be done with equity and dignity.
Right.
So, that makes me sick.
I think it made a lot of Devils fans sick when Nico was out for an extended period of time. And head injuries are no joke. And this is definitely not the first time that Nico has dealt with a head injury. So we're talking about not only someone being injured, but if he sustains more head injuries down the line, you could talk about his career being shortened. That's a real thing.
And it could be a lawsuit down the road from players against the league.
Right. So, but it's great to have Nico back, and it was up to him as to whether or not he wanted to play. According to Ryan Novozinski of NJ.com, Devils were treating it day by day just to see like how he was feeling. So it was really up to Nico if he was ready to return or not. He felt like the time was now. Obviously, the Devils were sort of spiraling because they had lost 2 straight games to the Red Wings and also the Blue Jackets in very pathetic fashion. So I think Nico realized, like, I need to be back out there quickly.
He just did a fantastic job playing two-way. Like, I know when I was working, I was like, I see that we're up 4-0. I'm like, holy crap, this has got to be the Nico effect. Because how other way, besides Jack Hughes and a couple other defensemen, how is this team able to sustain that without Nico in it? And I was like, Nico's got to be in the lineup. This is an X factor for me. And I always point to his draft year. When I watched him play against Team USA, and I know the World Juniors for 2024 is coming right up in December, around Christmas Eve. I fell in love with Nico Hischier's game more and more as I saw him playing around that time for Switzerland against Team USA and even Canada to an extent. But he really shined when he was with and without the puck. And he was just playing really tight along the crease. And he won some important battles against the USA, scoring a couple of goals. So really, when it comes to this time of year, like, it makes me think about why I wanted the Devils to get him. And he reminded me a little bit of Pavel Datsyuk. And, you know, that's one of the things I look for in players is, can they be the most exceptional player with and without the puck? And those are the guys that you want when it comes to these games in the NHL now. And going forward against the Islanders, they're going to be more defensive. And yes, they've had their lapses. You can never take a team granted.
Yeah, I mean, I think this game against the Islanders, I know the Devils have already beaten the Islanders this year, but I think they need to factor in, like, the Metro is tight. So you need to treat these games more closely. So, Jersey Joe, we've been talking for the past half hour or so. Before we close out, I want to any final thoughts from your end?
Well, going forward, we need to add guys like a Chris Tanev or even a Nikita Zadorov, so that way the Devils can sustain more skilled and offense, and not the offensive side, but the defensive side. Physicality, grit. You need to build that Sasquatch squad back to what it used to be when you had Severson and Graves. So you need to get that going. Tanev is a big shot blocker, but also he's not afraid to drop the mitts when told to, and he can answer the bell in the playoffs as well. Same with Zadorov, just the flip side. He's the body banger. You want that. So I will say this. I would keep an eye on the goalie coach, Rogalski. He's been around the Devils for a long time. I would like to see how he evaluates Vitek Vanacek and Akira Schmid. I don't blame it all on Schmid. He's a young guy, but he's learning, and he's starting to improve a little bit more. He's starting to gain that confidence back.
I just don't want too much pressure on him because, remember, Corey Schneider, Mackenzie Blackwood, young goalies who were thrusted into big roles. That didn't really work out too well for the Devils.
They should only split 50-50, in my honest opinion. And you don't want to, like I said, you don't want to overwork any goaltender because if you do make it to playoffs, which the Devils have good amount to make a playoff spot and get more competitive, you don't want to overdo anyone. You want to have a fair amount of rest. So, and you don't want to take a toll on the mental fatigue. And so when I have to look for goalies at the USHL and CAA level, it's not just the skill set, it's the mental capacity and the mechanics. And when fatigue enters in, that kind of messes around with the players' mechanics and how they compute.
So James Nichols released an article for both Nikita Zadorov and also Chris Tanev, and I think there's interest in both respective players from Calgary, and the lines are still open, according to James, between Calgary and New Jersey. So I know Calgary might feel a little bad doing another trade that helps out the Devils, but according to James and his sources, and I will take his word for it, I think the communication lines are still very much open between Calgary and New Jersey. So maybe we could see a move because Nikita Zadorov, he's actually went out, or his agency went out and requested a trade. So, and that was confirmed by Pierre LeBrun and also Kevin Weeks. So You got a pending free agent who wants out of a current situation. So I think Calgary, in that case, beggars can't be choosers. So we'll see what happens with Zadorov and also Tanev. There's been a lot of rumors saying that Zadorov might go to the Maple Leafs. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, you got two Flames players, and then obviously Sammy Blais, who I want to bring up once more. Sammy Blais had 119 hits last year for St. Louis. So obviously we wouldn't be getting him for offense. We'd be getting him for his dynamic of being a physical player. And I think
that's forechecking.
And his forechecking ability. And I think that's what Tom Fitzgerald might be looking at down the line.
But yeah, and like I said before, you have Tom Fitzgerald, who has Martin Brodeur, who knows the Blues organization, Doug Armstrong, all those other guys. Dave Rogalski also is a former Blues goaltending development coach and was there. He influenced Jordan Binnington in becoming a better goaltender in that season that they came back from all the way from the bottom to the tippity top. So what I'm eventually trying to say is that you got these connections of players and coaches that know the ins and outs of another organization that they used to be employed by. And the NHL has that, their fingers and those other cookie jars. So really what I'm saying is the Devils could possibly reach into that jar and go, yeah, we're going to add this to our platter. Let's serve it up good.
Well, we'll see what happens down the line. So once again, I want to thank Joseph Stanislaw for taking the time out of his day to come on and talk Devils and also talk trade speculation and always give great insight regarding the young guns for Devils. Joe, I know you're on this show quite frequently, but where can everyone find you at?
All right. So you know that Trey and I are both with Pucks and Pitchforks. That's part of Fansided. I'm on X, better known as Twitter, in my universe. So it's at JERSEYJOE11_NJ. I'm also on Instagram at _Joe of Jersey, JERSEY, that is. And I also will every now and then do a Heads Up Hockey episode. But lately, I've been doing my scouting diligence for Draft Prospects Hockey, better known as Draft Pro. So I cover the USHL and the NCAA. And don't be afraid to message me on any of those platforms. And you're more than welcome to message me at any time. I'm available to talk.
All right, sounds good. So, Joe, thanks once again. And like I do to close out every episode, continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.